And finally, it's come time to deport the last element to the east, the ones who have Aryan wives, German wives or husbands, the last ones they get round to. And he's moved into a holding camp in the middle of Dresden on, I think, the night of the 12th of February, 1945, with his wife. And the next day, it's on the train. But that night, the heavens open. Anyone who's read an account of what happened in Dresden that night doesn't need any words from me. The terrible thing, according to Frederick Taylor's book, is the climatic conditions were even better than they had hoped. It succeeded too well. It wasn't just a firestorm, it was, I think it's justifiable to use the term Holocaust, which many people object to, because it means the total destruction of something by fire. I do not believe it should be called a final solution, or an Endlösung, as the Germans would say. That would be quite untrue. But yes, a massive destruction by fire. And in the morning, there's no authority in Dresden anymore. And there's no one to take him to the train with his wife. And they peel off their yellow stars. She's made to wear one too. And they set off for their home and start looking for the Red Army. It's over. It's completely over. There's no one to give orders, and there's no one who will take them anymore. The only thing I think in our collective experience and imagination that one could call upon is General Sherman's decision to lay waste to the Confederacy, to make sure that not one brick is piled upon another until it is understood who is master now and who has lost, and to make that conclusive. I think it would have been better if Anthony had dealt in his book with the psychological effect of the years of the Thousand-Year Reich. It had to be utterly disproved that there was a leader who was all-powerful and all-knowing, as so many were willing to believe. It had to be conclusively shown that when they said, we will never allow a bomber in our own skies, that they were completely wrong. Do I have a minute to read something from Thomas Mann?
Yeah.
Thomas Mann wasn't Jewish. Thomas Mann was not Jewish, as you know, but he decided he couldn't live in Germany under these conditions. And in his great novel, I think, Dr. Faustus, published, I think, first in 1947, he plays the part of a German watching what's happening. He says, describing the finis Germaniae of the US AAF and the RAF, he says, this earth-shaking, plummeting havoc has come breathtakingly close to my refuge several times now. The dreadful bombardment of the city of Dura and Willebald-Pirkheimer was no longer some distant event. And as the last judgment fell upon Munich as well, I sat here in my study turning ashen, shaking like the walls and doors of my house. Its famous publishing district is, I sadly hear, only a heap of rubble, and an immeasurable wealth of literary and educational material is now the spoil of destruction. A loss not only for us Germans, but also for a whole world that cares about culture. That world, however, is apparently willing to take the loss into the bargain. Granted, he says, the destruction of our cities from the air has long since turned Germany into an arena of war, and yet we find it inconceivable, impermissible to think that Germany could ever become such an arena in the true sense. And our propaganda has a curious way of warning the foe against incursion upon our soil, our sacred German soil, as if that would be some grisly atrocity. Our sacred German soil, as if anything was still sacred about it, as if it had not long ago been desecrated again and again by the immensity of our rape of justice and did not lie naked, both morally and in fact, before the power of divine judgment. Let it come, says Mann. And then he says, when he thinks about Würzburg and all the beautiful gem-like cities of Germany being turned into powder and ash, this is terrible. He said, but I cannot allow myself to forget that terrible though German defeat is, it is nothing compared to the horror of German victory. He's willing to come to terms with it. He seems almost to invite something that is a judgment against which no appeal can ever be made. It's finished. There's going to be no myth this time that we could have won if we'd hung on a couple more years. That we were stabbed in the back by the Jews, they certainly weren't by then. That the cretinous homosexuals and communists and pacifists undermined German morale. No excuses this time. It's over. You have conclusively lost. And we can now begin to reconstruct German democracy and culture and civilization, which we did. Don't let it be forgotten. Sebald, in his book, which I greatly admire, refers to a war of annihilation. I think he should have not employed that word. Did not annihilate Germany. British and American soldiers did not commit atrocities against German civilians. Hitler's former allies in the Red Army committed the most appalling atrocities on German civilians, but if you lie down with the devil in that way, this is what you have to expect. We have everything to be proud of, it seems to me, in the resilience of the German people, who re-emerged from the rubble very quickly, without self-pity, without resentment, without conspiracy theories, to begin in this task of reconstructing not only Germany, but also a Europeanized Germany and a democratic Europe in which Germany still has pride of place as a centerpiece in economics, in culture, in publishing, in democracy. And it's something of which we're all of us consider ourselves friends of the German people, rightly proud, justifiably proud. I do not myself believe that without, I won't call it a war of annihilation, but without an annihilating, conclusive, incontestable, utter victory of the kind that Sherman imposed on slavery, that when the slaves were freed from the camps, that when the Klemperers could walk again in the street without the yellow star, that there wasn't that day a feeling of liberation. Heinrich Böll, in his closing letter to his sons, the one he wanted them to read after he died, his posthumous letter to his sons, one of the greatest German authors of all time, I think, says, "My boys, you will, as you grow up, always know what to think of any of your fellow countrymen, according as to whether they describe April 1945 as the month of German liberation or German defeat. Never forget this. Neither should we." Now, in closing, I've got to say two things about Anthony's book that gravely disappointed me, and that he didn't mention himself. One, I think that he should not have said that it would have been right for the air crews of the American and British air forces to refuse to obey these orders. I think it is of the first importance in the time of warfare, when civilian and democratic government is not just in command but at stake, where its existence is at stake, that the civilian and elected governments have the right to assume that they know the larger strategic picture and that their orders will be obeyed. And I think the suggestion that there should have been a mutiny in the middle of a war against the Third Reich is an immoral one, and I think you should withdraw it. I think it was entirely right for those orders to be obeyed, whatever the doubts may have been, because it is not the place of officers to take the place of members of Parliament and the British Cabinet. And then I'm going to have to read a chapter, a paragraph that I think disfigures the book. And I'll just quickly do this, and I think then it really will be time for me to end my hostage-taking of this audience. Anthony says, "A surprise attack on a civilian population aimed at causing maximum hurt, shock, disruption, and terror that comes to seem very little difference in principle between the RAF's Operation Gomorrah or the USAAF's atom bomb attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the destruction of the World Trade Center in New York by terrorists on 11th of September 2001. And this latter, prescinding from differences in scale and the drama of the target, is no different in turn from terrorist bombings carried out in Madrid by Basque separatists or in London by the IRA. All these, there's an amalgam here. Terrorist attacks are atrocities, consisting in deliberate mass murder of civilians to hurt and coerce the society they belong to. To say that the principle underlying 9/11, Hamburg and Hiroshima is the same is to say that the same moral judgment applies to all three. I'm sorry, I won't pass that. I won't take that. The terrorist organization, which is also a criminal multinational corporation, a secret society, a fanatical religious cult, and many other things, run by Osama bin Laden, is replying to no offense committed against itself. It's not attempting to protect or defend its own civilians. It is concerned with other people's civilians only to the extent that casualties in their ranks may be maximized to the greatest possible extent, and has not even a jot or tittle of justification on any strategic matter. I think it's quite indecent to mention these things in the same breath. I think spurious moral equivalence is the thing that must at all costs be avoided in this argument, and I do hope that that sentence isn't in the book when it's published in Germany. Very well. Thank you very much, comrades, and thank you, Anthony, for putting up with me.
Which of these working?